We start a new parak, Samach Beis Amud Aleph, the fifth parak. The Mishnah says, "Hasocher es hapoel lasos imo b'yayin nesach." So the question here is, when an idolater hires a Jew to work for him, and he's transporting yayin nesach, that's the job of the Jew. Or alternatively, he takes the yayin nesach of the guy and pours it into barrels, and he's getting paid a salary for that. So now the question is whether that money that he receives as wages for his work on yayin nesach is aser ba'ano, because we said that yayin nesach, whether it's yayin doraisa that was actually poured for the sake of an idol, or stam yenom when he touches that wine, in both cases is an iser hana. And now the question is, what about the wages, the money that he receives for benefiting indirectly from the ayin nesach? Meaning he's not having any direct benefit from the ayin nesach per se. He's just pouring the ayin nesach into barrels or transporting ayin nesach on behalf of the employer, the guy, from one place to another. And yet the wages indirectly come through the yayin nesach. So the Mishnah establishes scharo osur. Since he's getting paid for work for yayin nesach, any benefit he gets from the monies that he receives in payment for his work is considered a violation of the Iser Hano from yayin nesach. And the Gemara is going to discuss this at great length. Scharo lasos imolach acheres. Okay, this is a different case where the worker was hired, the Jewish worker was hired to do other work. And the question now is, how is this other work that he's being hired for related to yayin nesach? Afal pishamalo, the guy said to him, "Haverli chavish shel yayin nesach mimakom lemakom." That amongst the various jobs that he imposes and demands from the Jewish employee, amongst them, there's an entire list of them, but amongst them is to transport the yayin nesach. Schara mutter, in this case, he's allowed to benefit from the wages. The money is not asur midin hanoah, because we're going to say that the money was given to him for all those other works that he's done, even though included in that list of works is transporting the ayin nesach. The Mishnah continues, "Hasocher es hachamor lahavi oleho yayin nesach scharo asur." So now what happens is the Jew owns a donkey, which is used for transporting goods, and the guy, the idolater, hires the Jew to rent out his donkey, pay him a rental fee for his donkey, and the donkey is transporting yayin nesach. So once again, the monies that are going to be received, the rental monies by the Jew, are indirect benefits from the yayin nesach, and therefore the Mishnah prohibits it. However, schara leishev oleh, if let's say the idolater is paying rental fees for the donkey of the Jew to do many different tasks, the donkey could transport a lot of different things for him. So there was no specification that the monies that are going to be paid to the Jew are because of the ayin nesach per se. Is afal bishiniach ovid kochavim legino oleha schara mutter. Even though included amongst the things that are being transported on the back of this donkey that belongs to the Jew is also yayin nesach, it doesn't matter. The money and the rental fees that are being paid to the Jew are not explicitly for the transportation of the yayin nesach. It's not like the previous case. And therefore, in this case, where although the donkey is going to transport the flask of yayin nesach, but nevertheless, the monies are not being paid specifically They're not earmarked for the work of transporting the yayin. Now the Gemara asks, my timer, scharo, my timer us. And this opens up an entire sugya that we're going to learn today, Mirza Hashem, and that is the wages are not being paid because of the ayin nesach, meaning the hana that the poel, the Jewish employee, is getting is from the wages that are being paid him. He's not getting benefits from the ayin nesach per se. So on this, the Gemara is going to develop a whole bunch of different possible theories. Ilema, if you'll suggest this is possibility number one, hoil v'yayin nesach aser bano scharo nami aser. Perhaps you'll suggest that when he benefits, the employee, the Jew, benefits from the wages that he gets paid, he is really in effect getting benefit from the ayin nesach. Why? Because why is he being paid a salary? It's for his work in transporting the ayin nesach, or his work in, let's say, pouring the ayin nesach into larger casks. Gemara says that's not so. The hana that he's getting by spending that wage money is so far removed from the actual yayin nesach that it certainly is mutter, and I'll prove it to you, says the Gemara. Hare orlu klaya kem dasur ba'na. So we know that orla is the first 3 years that the tree produces fruit. All that fruit is asbano, you can't have any benefit from whatsoever. And klaya kem means when he mixed seeds of another species together with the vines of wine, the product of that mixture, which is called kelayim, is aser v'anoah. Utnan, and yet it says in the Mishnah, mechorin v'kiddush b'dmei mekudeshes. If, let's say, the man who owns the kalaya kerem or the orla violates the law, and he sells the orla or the kalaya kerem. Now, he has violated the isur hanoah of these two substances. But what happens with the money is the money that he receives as wages for, or in this case, actually for mechira, it says b'dmeim. So in other words, the Jew sold orla to a guy or klaya kerem to a guy, and he benefited from it. And now the monies that are being paid to him to purchase these macholas asuros, whether it's kelayim or orla, those monies, if he were to benefit from them, then indirectly he's benefiting from the orla and the klaya kerem. And if that be the case, if the wages become classified according to Jewish law as Isurei Hanoah, he can't use that to be Makadosh an Isha, because Kiddushay Isha only applies to something of value that she receives for Kiddushin, but not something that's also Bano, which she can't get any benefit from. And moreover, he doesn't even own Isurei Hanoah, because Isurei Hanoah lav moment. You can't own something that you can't benefit from. And therefore, he doesn't give her, ki kachish isha, anything for Kiddushin. And yet, the Mishnah establishes that the monies that he got in the barter deal, when he gave orla and he got back money, if he gives those monies to a woman, haret mekudeshesly, she is mekudeshes. It's a valid Kiddushin. And now we can make a kal vachomer. We could say the following. If in the case of a sale of Isurei Hanoah, the money is mutter, how much more so in the case of wages, which is even more far removed? So how can therefore you entertain the possibility that when our Mishnah prohibits the employee, the Jewish employee, from getting any benefits from the wages that he received for transporting ayin nesach, That can't be so. It can't be that that's considered and classified as hana, to violate the Isur of hana. Ella. So now the Gemara goes on to Roman numeral number 2, another possibility to justify our Mishnah as to why the money that he receives as wages is also. Hoil v'tofes is domov ke'avodas kochavim. So you may recall that we have in the past introduced a concept called tfisas domim, which we see by Shvius, and now we see it by Avoda Zara. And tfisas domim means that the violation is somehow transferred over to the domim or to the object, and it goes completely down the line from one object to another object to a third object, fourth, fifth, and sixth ad infinitum. And that's called tfisas domim. So, for example, if somebody sells shvius, then the buyer will have the shvius, the seller gets the money, and that's called tfisas domim. The laws of shvius will now be chal on the domim, on the monies that he received for illegally selling shvius. And now the Gemara wants to apply the same logic to Avoda Zara. And that is that when a man is paid wages for the work that he did on behalf of the Akum with Avoda Zara, or we could call it with Stam Yenam for that matter, then this tfisas domim, the wages that he's get paid are considered like a chalipin, like a replacement for the work that he did on the Yayin Nesach. And that's going to be passed on over and over again, like tfisas domim in the case of Shvius. Gemara rejects it. Hare Shvius the tofeses es domeha utnan ha'omer lepoel helech dinar zeh. Okay, now we get into a subtle, very subtle nuance of a difference in language here. A man is telling his worker that he, the worker, is going to receive the payros of Shvius as payment for the work that he did in Shvius. So it depends exactly on the language that the owner of the Shvius, the employer, said to the employee. If he said, Helech dinar zeh, I'm going to pay you a dinar, lekot libo yerek hayom. And that's going to be payment for yerek, for a vegetable of Shvius. And in this case, scharo asur. Basically, what he's doing is, the owner of the peiros shvius, he's selling his peiros shvius. In other words, instead of paying his worker, since he adds the word bo, that's the key word here, then what he means by the word bo is that I am giving you money for the vegetables of shvius. It's basically, it's a mechira. It's not like, well, I'm going to give you the peiros of shvius as payment for the work that you're doing on the peiros, which means, in this case, lakita, lakotli, meaning to harvest them. But he's basically going to tell the worker, here's a dinar, I want you to pick vegetables that are worth in the market 1 dinar. And basically it's a sale. The dinar is being paid to purchase the vegetables. And that's us. However, what about a case of wages? L'kot li'yerik hayom, if he omits the word bo, then scharo mutter. In other words, there's a difference between money that was received in a sale in which Shvius, Peresh Shvius was sold, that money is asur, as opposed to money that was received in wages to pay up for work that was done on Peresh Shvius. And in this case, the money is mutter, the wages are mutter. They don't have the restrictions of Shvius and the mitzvah bir. None of that applies. And therefore, by analogy, in the case of someone who's working on Yayin Nesach and he's being paid for his work, it should be mutter. Because there's no tfisas damim in this case of payment of wages. And now we have to come up with a third explanation for our mission. Rabbi Yochanan knasu shekonsu chachamim bechamorin ubiyayin nesach. This is nothing more than a knas. It's a penalty, it's a punishment that's imposed, a monetary punishment, because you are benefiting from Yayin Nesach. You're being paid for the work that you're doing on Yayin Nesach. That's a hanoah from Yayin Nesach. And as a result of the fact that you did this deliberately, intentionally, we're going to impose a penalty on you. We're going to say that the wages that you received are prohibited. So the Gemara says, Yayin Nesach hadamaran. Okay, we discussed Yayin Nesach. He's being paid wages for transporting the Yayin Nesach, pouring the Yayin Nesach, whatever it might be. But Chamor Maihi, what's this business about Chamorim? Chamorim are drivers that, in those days when you want to transport something, you use donkeys. So these are hired people for transporting through a donkey. And what's that got to do with anything? Why should we penalize the donkey drivers? And the Gemara answers this Sanya. Hachamorim shayu osim melacha bepeirol shvius ischaron shvius. So if you hire workers to transport peiros of shvius, the money that you pay to that worker has the status of shvius, scharo shvius. We don't know what that means yet, what a scharo shvius is, but one thing we clearly see, that we are imposing a penalty on him, which he deserves because he's being hired to transport produce of shvius. And my schar and shvius, shvius doesn't mean that he's being paid for his work with peiros shvius. Is nimtzu ze poreach chovu mi peiros shvius v'Torah omer liachlo v'lo l'schora. In other words, the boss here, the employer, is paying a debt that he owes for wages for a worker with peiros shvius. And the Torah says that peiros shvius are given to eat, liachla v'lo l'schora. And you're basically getting a business benefit from peiros shvius. That you can't do. So what does it mean, schar and shvius? It can't mean the avina le schar mi peiros shvius, because that's prohibited, liachla v'lo l'schora. The Ella, says the Gemara, the kadosh scharon b'kedusha shvius. that the wages now are sanctified with Kedusha Shvius, and is that really what's happening here in this brayso? Mi kadosh v'asanya ha'omer lepoel halach diner zel lekotli yerek. Same mission that we saw before. Yerek hayom scharo mutter. Right. In that case, he left out the word bo. But lekotli yerek bo hayom scharo also. So again, it's only because he said bo, and that made it into, as we said earlier, a sale transaction. That's why the dom marasa. But in the first case, which he didn't add the word bo, and he's just paying wages, then the halacha is those wages are mutter. So how can you possibly entertain the possibility that the donkey drivers for transporting, shvius, or for transporting yain nesach would be also? And those wages have, in the case of Shemitah, the same status as Shemitah. The Bryce is referring to a case that we are paying his wages through Perush Shvius. Now, we said that before. That's a violation of Li'achlo v'lo l'schora. Udukakash lo li'achlo l'schora is Yavina Niale B'tzad Heter. We're going to find a loophole, so to speak, in the law, and we're going to find a heter and a way of doing this. Now, what's the sad heter here? We said that in the case of Mechira, he violates the Achla V'lo L'Schora. What could be mutter here? And the answer is he's going to receive it as a gift. And that's called in the Lashon HaShas, Diyave Niale B'tzad Heter. So if he gets it as a gift, then he's not doing schara v'per shvius. This nan, as we learned in the Mishnah, lo yomar adam lechavero heloli peres haloli sholayim lechale.